Hi guys, I hope you're all doing well, hanging in there. I myself have been hanging in there this year, like many others, I guess, by reading one page turner after another. I've read a lot of romance this year and quite a bit more crime than I have in years and years. And recently I read some that were a mixture of both. And today's video is going to be all about a trilogy of crime novels that I devoured back in September. It is the Bitter Legacy trilogy by Scottish author Dal Maclean, and it consists of the eponymous first book, Bitter Legacy, which was published in 2016. And the second book is called Object of Desire and was published in 2018. And the last book, Blue on Blue, was published last spring. These are categorized and marketed as romantic suspense, and I think they get the majority, if not the entirety, of their audience from the romance readership. But I believe that they would appeal to a far wider audience. They are police procedurals and murder mysteries, and as such, they are compelling stories in their own right, and you never get the impression that the mystery is just the carrier for the romance, as happens so often in romantic suspense novels. But here, the mystery plot lines and the romance plot lines are very organically woven together and interconnected. All three of these books are all about the central characters and their respective character arcs, and the romance storylines just make the stakes so much higher for the central characters. And they are, of course, also integral parts of their lives and their personalities. These characters are characters that you are going to love intensely, and you are going to suffer for it. And you're going to suffer along with them, because they are all going through some pretty rough personal struggles and dilemmas, and they often stand quite stubbornly in the way of their own happiness. Sometimes some of their behaviors border on the self-destructive. And for me, this is catnip. Stubborn, self-destructive behavior is something that just always really gets me, because you get all these big emotions without necessarily a lot of external drama, which is quite often pretty unrealistic. But now for the individual books. So this is an actual trilogy, and I think it's pretty obvious that it was conceived as a trilogy. And while books 1 and 2 can be read as standalones and independently of each other, the third book can't really. The third book is where books 1 and 2 come together and everything is wrapped up nicely. Bitter Legacy, Book 1, is the book of the protagonist and sole viewpoint character James. I like to point it out when a romance novel is told from a single point of view, because so many romance novels are told from alternating viewpoints, mostly to their own detriment, in my opinion, and single point of view is a huge selling point for me, so I like to point it out in case other people feel the same. Anyhow, the protagonist, James, is a brand new detective in the Metropolitan Police in London, but he's already in his late 20s or maybe 30. He just recently turned his life around, basically dropped out of his old life. He was the heir apparent of his father's multi-million oil empire, but he became disenchanted with the industry and the lifestyle that comes with it, and wanted to take a job in which he could make a difference and fight for the good side. He is endearingly idealistic and optimistic and also a bit naive, but he is also very discerning and a very sober thinker. He has also recently accepted that he is gay and has come out to his father, which didn't go so well, although it's not a problem in his job. But his love life doesn't go so well either. or at all, in fact. This is obviously going to get resolved in the course of the book. This is genre romance after all. But let me tell you, it is a hard-earned happy ever after. The mystery plotline in this book is quite classic for a murder mystery. A young woman is found murdered in her apartment, and then a few days later, a couple more murders occur, and James has a hunch that they are all connected and the police are dealing with a serial killer. The romance plot line comes into this when James follows a supposed clue in the first victim's apartment to an address of a potential suspect or at least witness. However, it turns out to be an address for a viewing of a room that is for rent. James happens to be looking for a new place and moves in with Ben, the flat's owner or main renter, after Ben is cleared of suspicion by James' colleagues. However, Ben is going to play a central part in the solving of the murder mystery later on. In the second book, Object of Desire, we experience a police procedural from the opposite perspective. The protagonist of this book, Tom, is a civilian, as in he is not in the police. When Tom's boss and the co-owner of his modeling agency is found murdered, Tom is the prime suspect. And then a few days later, some more people turn up murdered who were all connected to Tom, and the case against him solidifies. Luckily for Tom, the case is connected to an old murder case in ways that only very few people high up in the justice system and the police command chain know about. And these people team Tom up unofficially with a private investigator who used to be a detective in the Metropolitan Police. This is an extremely uncomfortable situation for both of them, for Tom and Will, the private investigator, because they have a history, a very painful history, and that is, of course, relived, re-examined, and finally resolved in the course of events. A very dramatic course of events, I might add. The third book, Blue on Blue, takes up the threads and the characters from books 1 and 2. The protagonist here is Will Foster, the private investigator from book 2. He is in many ways similar to James Henderson, the protagonist of book 1. He is very idealistic in his own way. He definitely has a lot of integrity, both personal and professional integrity. But where James is trusting and optimistic and kind of driven by a conviction that a happy ending is attainable and things are going to work out in the end, Will has had his illusions shattered by people and events, both in his job and in his private life, and that has made him not exactly distrustful, but cautious and often reticent, and he's often closed off to the people around him. Of course, that often works to his advantage. It never hurts to be careful, does it? But it also sometimes leads to unnecessary complications, just as being too trusting can get you into trouble. Will left the police a couple of years earlier after all his attempts to bring a crime lord to justice failed spectacularly, and Will had no hopes left that anything he did would ever make one bit of a difference. On the contrary, it only seemed to get people around him hurt. But after the events of book 2, he is back with the police with renewed determination. And he soon has occasion to investigate in the old direction again, but it only leads into a hornet's nest of police corruption, and soon he can't trust anybody anymore again, except for James Henderson from book 1, who gets involved as well. And soon the two of them are in so deep that the only way out is through, and the only course of action that is left to them is to bring down the whole sorry house of cards. And their respective private lives get sucked into the main plotline as well, in rather dramatic ways. Both their private lives were connected to the main plotline from the beginnings of both the earlier books. These are just utterly captivating and smoothly written page-turners, and I loved reading them, but most of all, like I said, for their characters. Even though, or precisely because the characters are so... I don't like to call them flawed, because that's such an empty word. But like I said, they often act in such a self-destructive manner and stand in the way of their own happiness. And they are often remarkably blind to very obvious interpersonal things, or they can't escape their past and how it causes them to act in ways that are harmful to them. They just got under my skin and into my heart so completely, and I loved reading about them. And I ended up loving all the books, especially the first one, so much, even though I had some rather big problems with them. For instance, all the characters in the books, or at least all the love interests, are incredibly beautiful in a conventional sort of way, and I found this alienating in several ways, which would fill a whole video. And another thing, maybe the thing that I took most issue with, was in book one, which ended up to be my favorite, and I upped my rating recently to 5 stars on Goodreads. But one of the things that really rubbed me the wrong way in book one is that in the center of book one there is a social issue, or a social cause really, that gets misrepresented rather unfairly. Misrepresented in the way that there are several characters in the book who are rather unreasonable zealots who take the matter too far in some ways, and not one sensible or moderate position is represented at all. And it is a legitimate cause, and serious discussions have been had about it in recent years, and very reasonable and educated people have been arguing for it. So it's really unfair, or even bad practice of the author, not to mitigate her unfavorable depiction in some small way. It doesn't take a lot of effort. It usually takes just one sentence by one sympathetic character to show everything in a different light. I'm being cryptic here because I think that to name the social cause would be a little bit of a spoiler, that's why. But my point is that even though I found this and other things irritating in the books and disappointing even, and I had some issues with them, it in no way put a damper on my enjoyment of the books. And I think that that is a hallmark of a really well-executed novel, that you enjoy it so much and that you are so convinced by how it is crafted and by its well-fleshed-out characters, that you are willing to put these things aside and to say, okay, I hate this, but still a good book. With other books that are less well written, whose mystery is less well executed, and whose characters are less realistic and less well done, I wouldn't have been able to put it aside. I would more likely have put the book aside. So all in all, I recommend the Bitter Legacy trilogy almost without reservations. If you like male-male romance with your crime, chances are you'll enjoy this. And if you've read the trilogy or one of its books, I'd love to chat about it in the comments. And if you pick it up in the future, do let me know how you liked it. So I guess that's a wrap on 2020. I'm going to do my best of 2020 videos in the new year, just to be on the safe side. I'll see you on the other side. Take care, guys. Bye.